and welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. If you haven't, please subscribe for movie reviews across the spectrum, whether it be superhero movies like this, Captain America, Brave New World, or whether it be art house movies, Seed of the Sacred Fig, or TV shows, streaming shows, trailer reactions, you name it. Come here for one-stop shop for all your movie madness and mayhem and geekiness. So this is a review of Captain America Brave New World. I love that subtitle, Brave New World. Always makes me think of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, the book. But this is obviously Captain America as in Captain America A Brave New World, because we've got a brave new Captain America. And this is the fourth film in the Captain America franchise. And this really is very much a reboot, a reskinning and a repackaging, if you like, of the concept even of Captain America. Long gone is Chris Evans as Steve Rogers, and instead, in their stead, we've got the wonderful Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson. Now, Sam Wilson, who's now the new Captain America, but lacks the super soldier skills and sort of serum that Steve Rogers had and that other various super soldiers have within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We were introduced to him, and we were introduced obviously to him alongside Sebastian Stan as the Falcon and the Winter Soldier in the Disney Plus series. Now, before we get going, I'm a huge fan, or have been over the years, a huge fan of the superhero films. As a kind of 1970s Marvel and DC comic fan, I've loved watching them all be brought to life. But I'm in the camp that thinks that the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is in trouble. It's become dry, it's become leaden, it's become predictable. It became the market became saturated, didn't it, with just too much stuff. And also one of the biggest problems, I think, with all of the superhero stuff is that unless you've got your ring-bind folder of notes with you, you're struggling to get every reference and connect the dots and which multiverse are we in and which timeline are we in and all that kind of stuff. So here's the thing. I'm going to approach this like a guy who's seen the other Captain Americas, was never actually a massive fan of Captain America per se. Always found him a bit straight and a bit solid and a bit too sort of the boring end of American. My God, don't shoot me down in flames for God's sake. But, you know, it's just kind of, he was a bit predictable, but he was safe. And he's emblematic and he's iconic and all those kind of things. But he was the leader, wasn't he, of the Avengers? So this film very much is a sort of a course correction, not only for Captain America, but for the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, really. Now, going into this film, I was thinking, oh, fucking hell, why? Why this? Why this? And you can't help but feel that this film, right from the beginning of watching it, you think they committed to this ahead of time. I think they must have committed or signed a few contracts or got, names signed up to this way before they actually knew that something like this wasn't going to do particularly well. So right from the get-go, this is lacking any of the sort of key main Avengers. There's a cameo in here from Sebastian Stan. But you're dealing with, and it feels bad to say this because I actually really like Anthony Mackie, both as an actor, and I'll say it up front, I think he's actually incredibly good in this film. I think he's an incredibly reliable pair of hands. But even in the press push on the red carpets and the various premieres, I just felt there was a distant look in the back of his eye that kind of admitted some kind of defeat. And watching this film, you can't help but feel there's many aspects of this film that are a challenge. Least of all, the fact that it's obviously fallen under the umbrella or the auspices of the boycott campaign regarding its depiction of an Israeli character. We'll touch upon that in a bit, but I do want to say from the get-go, from the outset, that the reason I decided to review this film was because there's an enormous number of other people involved in this film who aren't necessarily caught up in the Israeli-Palestine crisis, and it doesn't necessarily mean just because you have an Israeli actor in a film playing an Israeli character that they are necessarily themselves Zionist nor advocates of the genocide in Palestine. So I think that's important to state from the outset. I am going to tackle the concept of the character and their role and the significance of them from the sort of global political perspective, but I just want to review this as a film in the first instance. So for me, the weird thing about this was, I've said all that about the previous Captain Americas, I always found him quite dry. It's not to say that he didn't become a bit funnier as the Avengers films kind of proceeded. I mean, the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe became a bit Guardians of the Galaxy-esque, didn't it, the more it went on. But because he was never the most sort of, what's the word? He never really kind of excited me. There was never really that much of an informality to Chris Evans's Captain America. I wasn't coming into this thinking, oh, he's got a really kind of, sort of towering standard of accomplishment to live up to, Anthony Mackie. I didn't feel that at all. I was well on board for a sort of slightly more sinewy, down-to-earth, grassroots-esque, less superhero, because he hasn't got the super serum, and actually a guy who's kitted out in just some wondrous kind of wings and shield and bits and bobs about his kit. He's a kind of amplified man. But one of the other big USPs about this film, of course, is that in it, Thaddeus Ross is played by, who's become President of the United States in this film, is played by Harrison Ford. And this is kind of Harrison Ford's opening sort of account, opens his account with the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the grand old age of, what is he, in his mid-80s, early 80s? I mean, he's old, and he at times in this, I felt he looked a bit tired. It's quite a demanding film to be in, and of course he not surprisingly in the role that was personified by William Hurt in previous iterations of Thaddeus Ross. He is the Red Hulk, and so he's privy to the same control your temper stuff that Bruce Banner is privy to. Mark Ruffalo's Hulk normally. So you've got Red Hulk in here. You've got a new Captain America. So it's kind of like, oh God, and who's got time for superhero shit anymore? Well, the weird thing about this film is, and I'm going to say it kind of relatively near the front, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And the reason it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be is I think this film gained an extra kind of heft, piquancy, relevance, a little bit more oomph from the fact that really it's about a president, albeit a sort of president, well, he is a good president, or he's a goodie, but he struggles with his temper, he struggles with his rage. But a lot of what this is about speaks to what we've seen a lot of in America, which is the White House and a struggling for power, strap lines like progress and unity and all this bollocks, make America great. I mean, they don't say that in this film. So it felt like this was quite timely. It sort of landed at the right time. If there's ever going to be an appetite for the political shenanigans, if there's ever going to be a Marvel Cinematic Universe film that's essentially a political thriller, then perhaps the best time for it to happen is in the early days of the Trumpian presidency. So that, for me, kind of actually added to it. It made me a little bit more invested. As I say, Anthony Mackie, I thought, did a really good job in this film of presenting a superhero character. He's the most, how difficult. It's like being asked to play Iron Man after Robert Downey Jr. has kind of done him, 3, 4, 5 times. A hard task. Even if it does happen like this in the comics, a replacement, and Steve Rogers passes, no longer is Captain America. What I liked about this was that obviously Anthony Mackie's Captain America is limited somewhat in his kind of superhero-ness and all that, but he still manages to wield the shield. And this film delivers some excellent Captain America shield sequences and shots and fight scenes. So in this film, you've basically got Giancarlo Esposito is in there, who's actually a brilliantly kind of effective lower level kind of villain stroke antagonist who gets into fights and is incredibly good. He's like a sort of very effective terrorist. He's very good. So you've got that sort of subplot, and then you've got this kind of larger plot where you've got the Samuel Sterns, or the leader. I think they keep calling him the leader, played by Tim Blake Nelson. He's the guy in this film who has his brain matter essentially sat on the outside of his head. Now that sounds quite grotesque and potentially quite funky, and let's get in on that. But to be honest with you, it's really odd, this film, because you've got this guy who's got a green head, a bit Toxic Avenger-esque, with a really rudimentary brain matter, which just looked like his brain was on the outside of his skull. It wasn't very effective, it wasn't very impressive, it didn't look very real. And the weirdest thing about this film, I'm not a fan of thrillers. I'm not a massive fan of political thrillers. And yet, in a weird way, with this film, I kind of got on board with it. You're not dealing with monsters. You're not dealing with big superheroes or super villains, per se. You're dealing with a guy in the form of Samuel Stern. He's able to control Harrison Ford, Thaddeus Ross, through the use of kind of phone technology, light technology, drugs and meds and all this kind of stuff. So what became quite interesting in this film, and I can't believe I'm saying this, is that Harrison Ford's performance at the centre as this kind of president seeking to control and quell his Hulkian rage at all turns, popping pills, trying to strive against blowing a gasket and then smashing up the White House. that's what a lot of this film is about, laced in with a nice little detail about his kind of dysfunctional, if you like, and estranged relationship with his daughter, played by Liv Tyler, who kind of walks it. It's weird, we see Liv Tyler, but you barely see Liv Tyler. You sort of see her through a nicotine-stained window that really disallows you from really kind of acknowledging who she is. But we saw the return of some of the more interesting characters from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, in the form of, what's his name? Isaiah Bradley, who's one of the other super soldiers. He appears in the Disney Plus series, played by Shira Haas, and he's got there's a brilliant scene where he's going to help the Falcon and he's going to help Anthony Mackie's Captain America to train. And you don't want to train with Isaiah Bradley because he takes boxing, you know, the boxing things that you hit that are so heavy and hard. He uses them and hurls them around and throws them at people and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, he gets kind of compromised technologically when he visits the White House for a kind of security meeting. And then it's quite neat, the kind of tech, the idea that these various kind of people around the president are being compromised by basically by this nut job with his brain sat outside his head, who's managing to kind of manipulate everyone. It does, you know, I sometimes worry when I look at the presidency, certainly the Bidens and the Blinkens and all that lot. You sort of look at them and you think, are you actually being remote controlled by aliens? And this film literally shows how that could happen, how they could be remote controlled by some malevolent force. I just found the malevolent force was really odd. It's just like a green bogeyman with brain on his head, and he just wasn't very villainous. I don't know about anyone else, but I didn't find him very villainous at all. I must admit, the thing that troubles me about a lot of these films now is that I lose interest in, you know, valuable minerals like, was it Varanium or Cassanium or something like that? What was this? Adamantium. I mean, okay, now there's adamantium, and there's a celestial hand coming out of the sea, and I found all that a bit shit. And as soon as it becomes really superhero-y, I lost my connection with this film entirely. So really, what kept me sitting there with this film was the idea that Anthony Mackie actually was a very real, very relatable, very down-to-earth, identifiable guy who was moving through these remarkably sort of straightforward kind of action sequences. I mean, there's a really good sort of aerial battle sequence where he's not fighting superheroes or monsters. He's actually fighting fighter jets, and that was quite cool because it was quite Boyzone. It's very Boise. I mean, I hate to be gender specific, but it's a very Boise kind of, you know, franchise and superhero, and it was all very Boise, Captain America-y. But I did like, I have to say, I'd be lying if I didn't say this, I did like seeing Harrison Ford at the centre of this. I was kind of more and more mesmerised with the size of his nose, because what happens, it's happening to me as I speak, as we get older, us men, our noses become larger and larger and our ears get longer. And so I was looking at a guy who I'd idolised about being my father, either as Han Solo or Harrison, no, he is Harrison Ford, or Indiana Jones. And I was looking at him, I was thinking, oh my God, now I want you to be my granddad. Look at your face. And there's a moment where he finds himself almost with no clothes on. And he looked really vulnerable. And I don't know if I wanted to see Harrison Ford vulnerable, but in a weird way, that added a real layer of kind of intrigue to this. So I really enjoyed, I thought they did a good job here of managing the build-up to his kind of pressure point going and him losing his shit and having a full-on kind of male menopausal moment and turning into the Red Hulk and smashing stuff up. I didn't care about the plot. I didn't care about where this slots into the MCU. I didn't really care about the idea of who would lead, you know, the new set of Avengers. It was very clearly referenced in this that we need the Avengers again, and we need a new set of Avengers, and we need a leader of the Avengers and all that kind of stuff. But the political thriller-esqueness of it kind of wore thin. I've heard a few reviewers say it's a bit like is it like a Lee Child book? Or the problem with this was I just didn't really care about the ultimate villain. I think this film could have been much stronger if they just stuck with Giancarlo Esposito as the kind of, you know, I mean, he's a villain, enough of a villain in Breaking Bad, but he was great in this. He was sort of almost unkillable. He was incredibly inventive. He was kind of dangerous. He was genuinely dangerous. So all in all, how would I sum up this film? Well, mediocre is about the best I can say. Despite Anthony Mackie giving it his all, there's a reason why he's on the red carpet at most of the premieres with a slightly hurt, lost, vulnerable glint in his eye. Because I think he knows this was a lost leader before it even hit the kind of big screen. This was, you know, there's a lot about this working against this, least of all the fact that, yes, you have a very contentious, Israeli character, who's the original character in the comics was, I think, or I believe, was ex-Mossad. In a weird way, this film is tone deaf when it comes to the global reality of the world outside. I mean, to be fair, they didn't go to the full extent of her character, but they don't make a big deal of her Israeliness. They certainly don't give her the sort of Star of David as part of her cape and all that kind of stuff. I felt she was kind of muted, so I think there was a gesture or a feeling or a sense in the filmmaking that she needed to be kind of her nationality and identity needed to be just managed a little bit, just in order to not upset people. But of course, the actress herself, Shira Haas, I didn't realise she too was very keen to be a member of the IDF, despite having medical conditions that would have, under normal circumstances, prevented her from serving. She really wanted to serve. She wasn't crucial to the plot. She wasn't a crucial element in the film, but you certainly couldn't lose her because she was there in the source material. I think, all in all, my question here is for Kevin Feige: why the fuck are you choosing to make some of the films that you're making? And it desperately feels like a number of projects that Marvel are committing to are just projects that they committed to when 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago they thought that it was this kind of the gold rush of just trotting out countless films was going to last forever. It really isn't going to last forever. It's coming to a grinding halt. And whilst this film has made relatively, healthy money in its first weekend, its audience score, its Rotten Tomato aggregator, it's not looking good. And I've got a feeling that in the second week, this is going to absolutely nosedive. There certainly isn't a lot in this film beyond, I would say, waiting for Harrison Ford to become the Red Hulk, and you can't really build an entire film around that. I didn't care about the Easter eggs. I didn't care about the kind of references out. I wasn't particularly concerned about where this sat within which phase. The end credit sequence where essentially green, blobby, brain-headed bogeyman says, you wait, things are going to get a lot worse out there. You're sort of thinking, well, what's happened to, where are the days of having really interesting, exciting, teasing and almost kind of quizzical kind of credit sequence routines or sequences where you're left thinking, ruminating, what does that mean? Who is it going to be? What's going to happen? There could be one strong reason for this, and it could be that because Kang the Conqueror has been kicked out of the MCU, perhaps that threw up more dilemmas and issues for the end credit sequence on this film than we will ever know, to be honest with you. I think this is an entirely sort of forgettable addition to the cinematic universe. It was entertaining enough. It was diverting enough. I think Anthony Mackie needs to be applauded for carrying it through, and Giancarlo Esposito and Harrison Ford. I think they all did a really sterling job with some really quite mediocre, average, pedestrian material. So this isn't gonna rock the firmaments, and I think this is gonna end up being another one of those. I think we're watching, if this was a prelude to the resurrection of an Avengers style thing, I think this will end up becoming one of the more forgettable Captain America, the Marvel Cinematic Universe films. But to be honest with you, nothing will ever reach the diabolical lows for me of the Eternals or the Marvels. Is that what they were called? The Marvels? Is that what they were called? They were just, two ghastlier films that I'd never come across before. And so if I was to score this, I would probably have to give this, sorry, Anthony Mackie, I feel for you, because he's good, he's solid, he's a great actor. 43 out of 100.